Michael is the Dean of Diversity Inclusion at the University of Puget Sound in Washington. And his topic is Latinos, Activism, and Social Justice, Cultivating Leadership and Building Community. So he's going to break it down for all of you of how do we get active? What is activism? And when do we start? And what's the right speed for us? What's too much? What's not enough? And what can we do to support one another? So without anything else, I'm going to bring him up front. We'll have questions and answers at the end. Feel free to ask questions. If there's something you don't get, write it down so that you can ask the question. If you're too shy, I'll stand in the back. You can bring me the question and I'll facilitate those questions and answers if you're too shy to raise your hand. Okay? Come on up, Dr. Benitez.
Thanks so much. What's up, y'all?
Oh, wait, you can flip this on so it's easier and you don't have to carry that, right?
Yeah, oh, okay, cool. So I could speak from here?
And I can sit that down.
But it won't clip here and it won't stay, right? What's up, y'all, again? Wow, I guess first, thank you so much for having me, for inviting me. Herlisa, thank you for having me here to West Valley College, for allowing me to come and just humbly journey with all of you. As she mentioned, my name is Michael, and I'm the Dean of Diversity and Inclusion, Chief Diversity Officer and Title IX Officer at the University of Puget Sound in Tacoma, Washington, although I started out as a poet. That's really my a lot where my love was at. I used to write poetry. I didn't share it very much. It was more for self-healing, self-reflection. And then in about 2005, 2006, I started to integrate it into lectures. What's up? Oh, word, that's all I got to do? Yeah, just dope like that. Yeah. And you know, it's wild because I'm really from a very humble background. So I was born in Puerto Rico, in Juanadilla. So I'm definitely a country palm cat. And right now in Tacoma, it's interesting because it has like a northwest colder tropic. There's no palm trees. There's a lot of pine trees. But it has sort of the similar feel in terms of the vegetation. So I like to compare them both. Then I moved to New York. And lived in New York for about 4 years or so. Ended up moving then to Pennsylvania by way of homelessness for about 1 year and 9 months. And grew up with my mom and siblings. So being here and being in this position and being a first-generation student, being Latino, caring about justice, caring about righteousness, it's surreal. It's really, really surreal for me, and it still is. And this is probably like the 300, maybe even 400 speech or talk I have given, but it's still surreal, if that makes sense. So today we're going to engage a little bit about Latino culture, identity, community, cultivation, leadership. How do we stand on that? How do we utilize that as agency for success? But more so, how do we rupture understandings of activism, engagement, and involvement in a way that breaks from the traditional norm, right? We normally think of the 60s. We normally think of the 70s and those times. We rarely think about the history before that, and there's plenty there to go with, starting with the late 1400s. But I don't want to make this about a history lesson, right? But I do want to connect history to contemporary society, to the work that we could be doing. Right on? So when I say that, y'all got to say right on. Right on? Right on. Word. So I wrote this big speech that I never really read because I just flow. So I'm going to go into my notes from time to time, because when you take time to write, it just sounds really doper and crisp. And then, for the most part, though, I'm going to be here just chilling with y'all, all right? You're also going to find I'm probably the most unconventional dean and CDO you probably ever meet, and that's okay. So I'll start off by saying, wow, leadership, community activism. I mean, we could go back to now, to kind of bring some history into it. really when we go back to anti-colonial resistance, right? That's where it all started. In Latin America, even in Puerto Rico, what happened there with the Spanish conquering that, with imperialism. We can even then go into the 16, 17, 1800s. We can go into some of the movements actually, here in the United States, in Texas, in California. When we go then into the mid-1900s, before even Brown versus the Board of Education, there was Westminster versus Mendez. Very, very important case because it actually set the precedence for Board versus Brown. And if you're not familiar, young lady by the name of Sylvia and that family were here in the area and had to attend a segregated school and really challenge the system. What a lot of folks aren't familiar with is that there's another case titled Lemon Grove that also took place back in Texas that also dealt with that segregation. I throw those out there to say that this is not new, but we're rarely taught about that. And any time that we're attempted to be taught about that in films such as Precious Knowledge, that actually show a very direct link between student success among Latinos really taking pride in what they do, culturally, who they are, learning about the history, learning about the struggles, but also learning about the successes. There is some systemic attempt to crush that. And when you think about Precious Knowledge, right, here's this film that actually say, yo, Latinos, like, you're mad dope, and you've done this, and you need to be proud of this. Success rate skyrocketed as a result of Latinos feeling like they now own. I could remember, now growing up, I could remember the history books offering me about 2-3 pages of who I am, and then telling me that shit wrong. Right? Giving me maybe a paragraph, 2 paragraphs, but not really talking about the resistance component, not really talking about how we're building community, not really talking about even it's okay to build community and have disagreements. Building community doesn't mean that everybody has to agree or be on the same page, but rather that we're attempting to get somewhere collectively, right? Leadership has to do with that. When you think about leadership, what do you think about? You probably think about someone in the front, maybe leading. Often we don't think about the people who are doing the work. And most movements, most leaders, actually were doing a lot of the grassroots work. Organizing, calling, communicating, correspondence. All those different pieces that make an organization go round and round. And then I also think about what do leaders need? Well, what leaders really need to have is people willing to follow, people willing to share in an idea and get in somewhere. But the leaders themselves always follow the people too, right? So it has to be looked at in that way. Now I want to go back to the history books. It's interesting because I was that cat who like had to know my stuff and knew that the books were kind of lying or being half-truthful. So I would, when I got a test, like if the right answer was A, maybe it was like the Treaty of Guadalupe took place and blah, blah, blah year. And I'm like, oh, the 1848. And then the way that's flipped, right, it's flipped very differently. So I really want to focus on rupturing and flipping, because even the Treaty of Guadalupe, real quick, who knows here what I'm talking about when I say the Treaty of Guadalupe? By raise of hands. Okay, no, that's good to know. So the Treaty of Guadalupe is the reason why most of the Western U.S. is now the U.S. Before it used to be Mexico. And when we talk about it like a treaty. We talk about it like some deal was made, right? But the reality is that there was events that happened that led to the treaty, or Mexico losing that land the way that it did. Part of it was coercion. And in many ways, part of it was also the U.S. taking advantage of a weak position, because Mexico just came off a war. So Mexico wasn't in a position to go into another major war. Now, a lot of folks look at it as, oh man, we shouldn't have given up that land. I look at that move in a very different way. To me, that was a move of survival and resistance. Because if Mexico would have went to war with the U.S. during that time, the chances are that right now we would have been the 95 states of America. Not the 50 states of America, right? Very, very important way in peace, right? Very different way to kind of flip the scenario and the way that the story is told. Now, with that said, now kind of bringing it to the present, and when when I think about that connection, that resistance, part of what brought everyone together was this understanding of moving forward, passing along, intergenerational continuity, intergenerational connection, one being the way that elders learn from young people, or wisdom keepers. And it's important that wisdom keepers learn from young people, because young people usually carry that genetic metamorphosis in their head that allows and continues resistance to occur, right? That's why you can never really kill movements, because there's always going to be young people. It's like hip hop. Because it belongs to the youth, you can't get rid of it. So there's that one piece around the idea, around the youth. Then there's the other piece. How do young people allow themselves to learn from the wisdom keepers? And not in the way that we've traditionally been taught, right? Like when I think about my mom, or even more so, because my mom kind of had a lot to handle, so I got to do a lot of what I wanted to do. And I'll talk about identity and culture and how that relates to it too, because it matters. But I think about the respect your elders, always to look at them in the eyes, always stand a certain way, always be attentive, don't talk when they're talking, oh those. But for a lot of youth, what does that mean for youth when they see that elders themselves are engaging in practices antithetic to respect? How do you ask a youth to simply stand there, sit there, and respect? So one piece has to do, again, with young people, right? Teaching elders and elders being willing to receive. And the other one has to be, or has to do with the extent to which wisdom keepers or elders practice very particular pieces of their life so that the youth can learn by example, not just by telling. And you begin to learn about these in different ways. Right? I have 3 children now. They're pretty incredible. I learned that they do an incredible job watching you and learning from you when one day this happened. My son came from school. He said, "Mom, I'm going to boycott the cafeteria." He's 8. Being the activist, right, that I am, I was like super amped. I was like, yeah, papa. That, you know, in Puerto Rico, we sing when we talk. And I'm pretty sure that extends culturally. So when you listen to my mom talk, she's like, bueno, Junior, ya tú sabes, tú sabes. Right? So I'm amped. I'm like, yeah, papa, yeah? ¿Y qué? What? What happened? So he goes on to tell me, he's like, well, Dad, right? Again, at this time, he's 8. He's like, well, Dad, you see, so I was with my friends, and we were in the cafeteria, and I went to get my pizza, and then when I went to sit down, and I looked at my pizza, I saw it had hair in it. So I was like, I'm gonna go get me another slice. So I went to the lunch lady, and I'm like, excuse me, can I have another pizza because my pizza has hair in it? And she decided that she wasn't going to like give me a pizza. She didn't give me one. So I was mad, and I'm still mad. And I'm like, well, you have a right to be mad, right? So then I said, so what happened? He's like, well, now I need Mom to just pack my lunch. And if you could pack my lunch because I'm boycotting the cafeteria. Meanwhile, my daughter, who was 5 at the time, says, Mikey, what's boycotting? Me and my wife, we're just like laughing our asses off because this is really, really cool. Right? We're like, see, they're learning how to boycott early, good, right? And as we let them talk, and as I let my son then kind of describe to my daughter what's boycotting, because you know he's going to do it in his own words, because Jazzy's like, what's that? So now he's like, well, Jazzy, so boycotting, it's like when you don't give people like your money because what they're doing is not cool. All right, I could take that definition at age 5, 8, you know, works for me. We're still laughing on the side. Then Jazzy, as we embrace Mikey, right, because you got to look at the context and the scope of all of this, as we're supporting and advocating and saying, right on, Mikey, then Jazzy kind of comes out of the blue, and she's like, Mom, Dad, I'm going to need you to pack my lunch too. And we're like, why, mamita? ¿Qué pasa? Are you boycotting the cafeteria too? And at age 5, she literally stood back. She's like, no, I'm girl-cutting the cafeteria. Right, so it's interesting, right, that she then kind of also owned at least how she perceives her positionality, right? There's gendered pieces, right? And granted that it's problematic when we think in the binary, highly. So I wanna point that out as a point of positionality and intersection, the concept of how we gender or engage in gender or gender non-binary. But that was, at that time, that's what happened. For me, for the first time, this different pieces struck. It's like, wow, children really do learn when they see it happen in front of them, as opposed to when we constantly tell them. And I think that today, we also do that a lot in a different way. So I want to speak to the wisdom keepers, and I also want to speak to the wisdom seekers. I think I fall in the middle. You know, I'm not quite a wisdom keeper yet. I mean, I have wisdom to offer, but I could be young for quite a while before I say I'm a wisdom keeper. I'll just, you know, struggle with age and my own self. So one thing that we do today, parents to children, is we fail to share stories of struggle, stories of service, stories of pain, stories of sacrifice, stories of solidarity, right? All those S's. I call those S's the S's, Victor Lewis's 5 S's. Because he's one of my mentors, and he's the one that I learned the value of those S's. And I'll share with you what they mean in the context of leadership, community, social justice, right? In not sharing those stories, we actually take away the tools for our youth to be able to grasp with difficult issues today. Although we think in many ways that we're protecting youth, that we're protecting young ones by not sharing the pain, by not sharing their stories, oratory knowledge exchange is very much embedded in the ancestral and genetic blood of Latinos. When you think about indigenous roots, when you think about African roots, and even when you think about Spanish roots, we gotta acknowledge all of them. That is all to say that when that sharing stops, that's when you find that folks run into issues. They don't know how to deal with it because they have nothing to stand on. They have nothing to really go back to and say, how do I know this? Where do I know it has happened before? How do I work with this? How do I garner support around me, right? So the first one being then struggle. Let's talk about struggle for a little bit and why struggle is important. The reality is that Latinos, this cosmic group based on gendered identities, on the construction of race, even the construction of ethnicity. And I know we convolute race and ethnicity quite a bit in many different ways, right? But we shouldn't. They're very interrelated, very mingled, but the problem with convoluting them is that outside of the constructions, one is representative in terms of appearance, the other one is representative with respect to practice, cultural practice. And then the construction of gender. If you're familiar with history, I know we talk about racism in the US, but colorism and racism in Latino America, and then the flow of that into US culture is very, very deep and very, very real. And we don't talk about it, I think, enough. And it's part of the reason why we're unable, I think in many ways, to be as successful in talking about issues and cultivating community. Because if we relegate constructions of identities only to others, for example, yes, we are in a society that was constructed first and foremost on capitalism, that then led for us to have to think about how do we maintain power and control. Well, let's construct race. That allows us to maintain power and control. Well, let's construct this thing called gender. That allows us to maintain power and control. Let's construct a lower class and an upper class. That allows us to maintain power and control. And by us, I am talking about the 1-2% that many people refer to today. So now coming into the US, right, you have this huge influx. Although the influx was always there, but let's just say that 1848 was that significant, and also the late 1900s, when we think about then Puerto Rico, Cuba, the Caribbean part of Latin America, and the relationship between the US and that portion of the world, let's just say those are the pieces where much of it started. There's also a level of patriarchy and white supremacy that lingers in those spaces that is flowing onto this transnational space called the United States. So when people say, like, here's an interesting fact. Did you know that the Latino population over the last 5 years, or that the white population over the last 5 years actually increased by 6%? By way of white identifying Latinos. That's a lot of millions of people. 6% growth by way of Latinos who identify as white. Now, a lot of people can say that's about internalized oppression, that's about people not really knowing themselves. Much of that is very true, but I will also add that much of that has to do with the concept that a lot of Latinos actually identify as white, see themselves as white, have that cultural background. When you intersect that with how class matters, how do you practice, whether it's how people eat. That's always been crazy. No, tú pones la cuchara aquí, este tenedor va aquí, este tenedor va aquí, el cuchillo va para. It's like, I don't care what my tools are, man. As long as I can eat, I'm good. But they don't have to be situated or lined up. Practices that are not associated with culture, but that are very cultural, right? And then when you think about colorism, who was at the top, right? From Spanish to Peninsulares to the Creoles. And then when you think all the way at the bottom, no different than in the US, Afro-Latinos. If you go to any Latin American nation, you're also going to notice that Afro-Latinos also live in the most ghettoized and worst conditions in all those countries. Very similar to what you see happening in the US. So I want to take that then and connect it, right? Struggle. To struggle means that you think beyond yourself and that you're willing to put yourself aside, not in the sense of death, right? Because to be honest, I'm kind of ready for that, but I'm really not ready for it yet. I got kids. So I'm going to be very careful about how I become involved, and I'm an activist. And the last thing that I want to do, and I'm not ready for, is say, I'm willing to die and let my kids grow up without a father. Because that's my reality in the US. If I say some things, if I act in certain ways, and I don't need to provide context. I think anyone familiar with the media, social media, from TV station to online media, I mean, you name it, we've seen the way that police treat black and brown people in the US. It's a hard thing to talk about. It's not to say that all police are bad people, but it is simply to say that there is a prioritization of who gets treated a certain way and what lives are valued. The data shows that, and now the images are starting to really show that in a very real way. And if we don't acknowledge that neither, again, then that's a problem in the cultivation, because when you take that now into the school, into the workforce, and I don't know if this has ever happened to you. I want to just throw it out there because it's happened to me a lot. So I'm that cat that was always one of the only ones in the class. Anybody kind of get that feeling from time to time here? You're like one of the only ones in the class. You get there, you look around, and you're like, damn, I guess I'm on my own. But then you see somebody that kind of looks like you. Bing! That's my ally right there. We make that assumption about the ally, right? The presumed allyship, right? We're like, ooh. So when I have something to say and I stand up and I disagree, that person is going to be on my side. So then you build the courage eventually. And one day somebody says something really crazy like racism doesn't exist. You know. And then you stand up, you raise your hand, you're like, nah, because of this, and this, and that. And then everybody starts kind of arguing, but yeah, color shouldn't matter, race shouldn't matter, we're all human. You know, the whole post-racial dialogue. Now, let me be playful with words. If we're going to talk about racial in the post, then we need to situate that in post-colonial thought so that the post is about rupturing and the different subtleties of racism, not the post, as in the post of racism, right? So that the racism now is physical, it's overt, it's covert, it's microaggressions, it's unconscious bias, it's all these different pieces that play out, that prevent us from cultivating. So we're going to talk about the post. That's what the post should represent, right? A very critical outlook into how it plays out. Now then, you point at the person, as I normally do, and yo, Juan, back me up. Then Juan comes out. Juan has no accent. I was wrong in assuming there might be an accent there, or assuming there may be a cultural connection. And then I find out that Juan actually is not only agreeing, but he's actually the biggest culprit in the room. He's an assimilationist. He's like, well, we want to just get through, then we should just adopt the culture and survive and get through and forget everything that we know. And then I'm like, damn, it backfired. Although I looked at this cat and I thought that he was on my side, this cat may kind of look like me, but ideologically speaking, he's in a very, very opposite and different place. So there's that piece of being the only ones, right? And what does the only one look like? So to struggle also means to have a sense of conviction. I want to talk about conviction, right? I want to talk about conviction because conviction is that piece that allows you to believe in something and do it irrespective of whether or not people are going to stand with you. I was always that person. Sometimes it backfires, sometimes it works out really, really well. But for the most part, there's a very particular type of necessity, passion, and conviction that you need, even if you're the only one holding a sign, even if you're the only one questioning a teacher, respectfully. There's a context for everything. Like, I may disagree with my homies in a crazy way. Like, I'm going to be like, what? Hell no. San Fran ain't going to beat the Giants. That's crazy. You crazy. Now, I know the Giants kind of suck these days. I'm hopeful. The New York Giants. But I ain't going to talk to my mom like that. Right? I ain't going to be like, oh, hell no, Mom. You crazy. Giants ain't going to beat the Niners, so there's a context. If that was to happen, my mom would have taken that real famous, and all y'all might know it, chancla. And that chancla is crazy too, because I've never seen a chancla be able to fly and be back in your mom's hand in 1 second. So you say something, no. What? I'm going to hide that. Then the chancla is like right in her hand. You're like, damn, how you do that? You just threw it at me. Right? I call it the chancla of wisdom. Thanks. And I throw that out there to say that there is a context and we have to consider that context. So that struggle may look separate in different places. Today, that context, that struggle really depends on where we're at. For some, it may be giving up TV. For a community, let's say I know in this one there's quite a bit of commuter students and you're not on campus, it may be intentionally carving out some time to meet and take some effort, right? To build some goals, to create a vision, to come up with solutions and say, what do we want to build out of this? What do we hope to achieve out of our meetings? When we think about cultura, that's all over the place. That we essentialize Latino-ness into one culture is part of the danger itself. Because this, I mean, you want to talk about an entire continent locally situated in Latin America, transnationally and diasporically situated here, that is as complex as anything, Latina culture does it. And it does it because of all the array of representations. It does it because even the categorization scale that was created for power and difference had like 30 or 40, maybe even more categories. Whereas here it was like black, white, Asian, Pacific Islander, native, and that's all essentialist. Over there it's like, well, if the person in this relationship is of this sort and the person in this relationship is of this sort, then this is how much power they have and where they fall on the social scale. So gender then comes into the picture in a very real way. So to ignore gender as part of these conditions makes no sense. Gender has to be part of the way that we problematize, because it has led, from a very Eurocentric perspective, led to behaviors and practices where we engage in self-destruction as a Latino community that we need to overcome. Right? What do some of those practices look like? Well, it looks, similar to what I just shared in the classroom. What do they look like? It also looks like in the way where we don't talk about race within Latino culture, because we're like, well, we're all Latinos. And even we're all Latinos, right? I don't want to take away from cultural practice. Here's another example, Spanish. We talk about Spanish language. I speak Spanish, lo hablo muy bien. I mean, a very Caribbean Spanish, right? So like we talk real fast and probably mess up the language a little bit. I'm okay with that. So folks may talk to me, especially if you catch me in the community, I might be like, no es que está por allá, entonces lo que voy a hacer, viene a la tienda, pues tú sabes. It's like, oh, what the he say? Right? And everybody always comes to me and says, how come your son speaks Spanish, sort of, understands it well, but he really needs to learn Spanish? And my response is, look, cultural celebration is important. It is incredibly, incredibly important. But we also need to recognize the tools and the agencies. Now, if there's one reason why I really, really want my son to learn Spanish, it's not because I'm celebrating culture, because if you want to talk about Spanish culture, you want to really talk about a dark Renaissance age, and you want to talk about the way that imperialism and the way that it played out, and the injustices and the amount of people that died at the hands of Spanish culture, is that then what I'm celebrating? Now, I tell you what I will celebrate. Knowledge, representation, and production. If my son knows Spanish, that means that through Spanish language, he's going to get the realest truth about how he came to be. So if he needs to know Spanish, he needs to know Spanish as a tool of resistance that allows him to read something for the way that it was written, not the way it was translated. A very different way of thinking about language and discourse. But if it's about cultural celebration, which I could problematize now, let's talk about cultural celebration, right? Let's talk about the way that everybody in college wants to dance, that everybody in college wants to eat food. Everybody wants to do something that celebrates, and that's okay. But for that to happen without politics, without addressing some of the real issues, whether that is immigration, undocumented students, intergenerational disconnects, the fact that Latinos, even though we have some phenomenal people out there, from, wow, Carlos Muñoz, to Laura Rendon, to Gloria Ansaldúa, to Sonia Sotomayor, we have some incredible leaders that we need to celebrate and honor and acknowledge, because it wasn't easy for those Latinos and Latinas to get to where they're at, to be pioneers and founders, to be groundbreakers. But we cannot also just go on and be commoditized, be consumed, all our cultural practice, but without the people. Even when we think about Taco Bell, Taco Time, or the million ways taco is used throughout the United States, right? As if it has no relevance or significance. And for those of you who are culturally connected, you may know that even tacos have a very deep cultural meaning about community, about cultivation, about cropping, about the corn, about how that comes together. It's not just something that was put together through GMOs in a box that you kind of buy. And you know what? Let's just say that's fine too. But to not talk about it Because, again, commoditization of culture and cultural appropriation, we allow it to consume us, but we also have to address the power issue behind it. How are we creating access? Right? That's a big part of the work of the Office of Diversity and Equity here. How are we ensuring that students are met where they're at? How are we thinking differently about their needs? So that the same cat who gets, so if somebody has 8 and they got to get to 10, and somebody has 5 and they got to get to 10, the person that gets 5 to get to 10, and then there's a person that gets 2 to get to 10. But because one person gets 8 doesn't mean that, or because one person gets 5 doesn't mean that the person with 8 also gets 5. Right? That's a very equality framework. It means that the person that is at 5 has to be okay with getting 5, and the person that is at an 8 has to be okay with getting 2 to get to that 10. So that equity, equality conversation has to be part of the conversation. Why does that matter? Well, I assume that a lot of you work. I assume that a lot of you also like to have some fun. I like to have some fun. I also assume that you like to take a trip here and there, take some self-time, all that stuff. But what's the trade-off? So if somebody is able to put in a little bit more when you galvanize, when you organize, when you meet, is it okay for somebody else to put a little bit less because they're at a very different place? And perhaps the tables will shift later on. Sacrifice, right? That's to speak to sacrifice. Now, a lot of the folks that carved the path for us, their struggle meant death. When we think about the 60s and the amount of not only Chicanos and Mexicanos, but also Puerto Ricanos and Boricuas that were killed as a result of political ideology and efforts at liberation that died. Whereas today we could think about death, but it's not that serious in terms of how we go about organizing. So here's an example from Penn State. Back in the 90s, we organized because, like many campuses, stuff gets ugly. And we decided what was the best way. Particularly, this was Black Caucus initiated this. Now, I was a part of Black Caucus. So we decided we're going to have these meetings. We're going to reach out to different organizations. We're going to reach out to different folks, faculty, see who can at least offer support. Also knowing that some may not be able to provide a physical support, but perhaps emotional support. That is to say that all different voices matter. After that, then Latinos came in. They were like, we got you, now we're together. After that, then Asian Americans, South Asians, Southeast Asians came in. Some religious groups came in. The LGBT community came in a little bit. Now you have this movement by way of one group starting it. So we have a student union building that I would assume might be like this building. We took it over. But we didn't take it over as in, let's go take it over. We decided that we were going to chill there until they did something about what our needs were. What happens when you chill in one space for a long time with limited showers? What happens? The place gets stinky, right? Now, we were having fun doing it. We were playing dominoes, and just real quick, you know, any Boricuas in the crowd, just so I know, don't know, Boricuas in the crowd? Damn, so, like if I say chuchazo, y'all gonna know what I'm talking about? Damn, okay. If I say capicu, y'all gonna know what I'm talking about? Damn, okay. So we're playing dominoes. We're playing spades. Y'all familiar with spades? All right. We're playing briscas. Okay, we're playing all sort of things, but we're having fun. Some students are like, oh yeah, I'm bad and I'm not gonna go to class, right? And that's where I start, I'm like, yeah, so like I'm not down with that, and you could choose not to go to class, but like I'm gonna go to class and then I'm gonna bring my ass right back to the space. Because you're first and foremost here for academic success and to be academically successful. But that doesn't mean that that has to stop you from being engaged and involved and pushing the envelope in a way that addresses the needs of the broader community. We cannot wait for something to happen to people close to us for us to begin to care. And that's usually what happens in day and age. When something happens to a friend, all of a sudden we're down. When something happens to a family member, all of a sudden we're down. But when something happens in the broader community that we see as a disconnected to our immediate local space, we do very little because we don't see it as connected to our personal lives. So that conviction means that we start caring beyond that. Then there's solidarity. What does solidarity look like? Well, solidarity looks like someone who is able to stand with an issue without the issue being about them specifically. It doesn't mean y'all agree. It means that you're seeing the importance of this for an entire community. And then service. Most of you will not see the labor and the fruit of what you do, even when you think about the workforce. For example, so I'm a chief diversity officer. Part of what I do is I strategically think about how to not only increase diversity, but cultivate a campus climate so that beyond multicultural presence, that there's actually a healthy environment of persistence, not everybody feeling like they're surviving all the time. And in doing some of that work, I established collaboratively a local cohort. And I said, Dan, we have this phenomenal program. And it's a STEM-based program for 7 to 12 graders. We get 65 students per summer. And in the last 25 years, we've only had 11 students enroll at Puget Sound. But the students who participate in this program are going on to a post-secondary opportunity at an 86% rate, with 54% of them advancing on to a 4-year institution. The others are going to a 2-year institution or vocational. But point being, 11 students in the past 25 years. So we developed this cohort that meets students at full need. And in the last 2 years, we've already had 7 students from the local community, right? Developing, cultivating a relationship with the local school district. And I say that to say that I know, as a service, I'm not going to see the results for at least 4 or 5 years out. It's at 4 or 5 years out that I could revisit that and say, what impact did this, well, I don't want to call it guerrilla administration, but this different way of thinking going to impact this community? So that long-term vision matters, but we are very concerned in many ways with doing something in the immediate and seeing that result like tomorrow. Like if you put a seed down and you put water on it and then you come back the next day and you're like, damn, there's no tree. It takes time. And that's very important to know. One of the biggest issues also community versus collectivity, right? Let me tell you a little bit about that. You know how many times I've been at places, and so there's now this place where different student organizations, right, because we each have our things. There's the Puerto Rican Student Club, there's MECHA, there's the Latino Student Association, there's 4, 5, 6, different organizations, and they each have like 6, 7 members. And then they'll host an event, vary about similar issues, and then they'll have a conversation afterwards, and they're like, yo, so how many people attended your event? And I'll be like, oh, it was maybe like 13 people, And then the other person will be like, we got you by 2. We had 15 people. And you just kind of look at that, you step back, you're like, damn, y'all could have done it together and probably had about 60 people. So we have to recognize when it's important to celebrate our nationality, our particular cultural practices, but we also have to recognize when it's important to bring those together and celebrate collectively. There's no one way of doing things. That multiplicity really, really matters, right? The other piece I want to talk about is complacency. But I want to talk about it from a very critical lens. So a lot of people usually confuse complacency and conformity in cultivating leadership, cultivating community, addressing social justice, right? Social justice, to assure that every member in your community feels included, to assure that they feel psychologically and physically safe, to assure that we don't think only in integrated ways, because we have to even separate those. When you think about diversity, diversity is diversity. Diversity before the 1960s meant that, oh, what a diverse set of chairs. Then it was politicized as a discourse in the 1960s. Now diversity means something that intentionally was lacking, like multiculturalism, which is integration, but without bringing the power with it. When we think about inclusion now, you're going a step further, and you're saying, now that we have this presence, how are we assuring that they're at the decision-making table? Because Latino communities are so incredibly diverse, when we just say Latinos, that's like missing out on so much. And I'm pretty sure it's the same thing with other cultures. Right? We do it with black culture, we do it with Asian culture, and we do it with white culture too, and we do it with native cultures. Whether we're just like natives with giving no respect to tribes and tribal affiliations, whether we do it with Asians, although Asia represents a lot. And even the African and black diasporic sort of connection and the amount of vast difference that is present there. So we have to hash out those particularities in there in order to get to that place that we want to go to. So now complacency or conformity, how does that play into that? Sometimes we approach something like, complacent. It's just complacent. It's just conformed. But I want to split those, see, because conform means that actually something happened and that you have conformed to that happening, to that action. Complacency signifies that not even something took place yet for you to even conform to. So when we break down what that means, right, that means that how do we keep going? How do we know when to stop? When do we find it okay to heal, get a break, and conform to some of what has been going on before we pick it up? And how are we showing up complacent, as if to say, you know, I really don't care how things are going on. I'm okay, I'm cool, I'm an individual, I'm not being affected. But what does that mean for others? As an advocate for social justice, there's a lot of Latino kids who get really badly treated in the school system in the US, unfortunately. So am I going to be that parent who comes in and says, okay, I don't like the way you treated my child. This is how it's going to be from now on. This is what you're not going to do from now on. However, it shouldn't have to matter that I am a dean and CDO for you to treat my children good. You need to treat every single children in here with decency and respect in the school district. Not only when you find out that their parents are in a position of power. And that's what happens a lot. Now, I could be that parent that says, my son is good, my daughter's cool, everybody else just figure it out on your own. Or I could be that parent that says, my children matter, I'm going to think about them obviously first and foremost, but all the other children also matter. So what can I do and say, and how can I get some different parents together and reach out? And the way that this is an anti-colonial move is because time, I always say this to everyone, the concept of time is colonial. Time didn't exist before colonialism in many ways. There's a certain way the sun came down, the way it went up, the way the skies shifted. Like, we knew that it was raining a lot, we couldn't share crops. It's just not going to work. We knew that certain things happen in some areas. There's a reason why migration naturally took place. Not across borders, but like in this time of the year, this place gets really flooded. We probably don't want to build a house there. At this time of year, this place gets really hot, and in combination with the wildfires, happens a lot in Cali. I want to stress that. I want to stress that because that's part of that knowledge, the indigenous knowledge we dismiss. There's a reason why certain people don't live in certain places at times of the year. And it's unfortunate that we have to see so many people lose lives, homes, because they're not listening to Earth. Right? So bringing this back, because I went on that tangent real quick, because I wanted to bring it back to a point. So the concept of time. What that has done is it has tied to productivity, right? So time is colonial, so I always say, whenever we have to stop, or if we have a Q&A isn't limited, or things happen only a certain amount of time, blame colonialism. Because until that happened, the concept of time really didn't mean nothing except it was of value to that particular community and the people that practice in certain ways. Now, when you bring that to today, what does that mean for you? Think about your day. You get up, you watch some TV, maybe you work, probably work quite a bit. You got to come to school, put the time in to study. Maybe you got to watch your show. What's the trade-off? What's the conviction? I have to intentionally keep myself informed, but overall, I don't have time for a lot, but I have to make time if I want things to change. So I want to really hit that. The concept of carving out intentionally some time to make things happen or to engage issues. It doesn't have to happen in a week. Most effective organizing really happens over time after a lot of people really get it together. Folks understand the type of roles, even in the workforce. I know that there's a class here, particularly in business, when you think about communication, when you think about infrastructure, when you think about strategizing. Something to think about when we think cultivating leadership. What does a leader do? How do we cultivate community? So I want to go back a little bit to my days. And I want to read a poem. Y'all down for a poem? Yeah. This is a poem that I wrote because I had to remind myself that even though life is hard, and even though sometimes I get pulled over like 3 times a day, and that really could bring you down. It kind of brings your spirit down, right? And it sometimes even makes you not want to care. That there's something worth saving, something worth being hopeful about. If you don't maintain hope in the bottom of your heart, like me going to college. I didn't go to college because I was like, oh, I'm going to go to college, do A, B, and C. No, I went to college because I wanted my mom to have some bragging rights in the hood. So that my mom could walk around and be like, ay, Junior está en college. Junior está en colegio. No, sí, en el Penn State. And then some of my peoples couldn't even put that together. Yo, fam, bro, I heard you were at the State Penn. When you get out, I'm like, nah, man, I was at Penn State. I know, that's what I heard. What you do, like 2-3 years? Nah, bro, I was at Penn State, man. Not the State Penn. But then I went to college, right? And then I developed a sense of doing it for myself. But primarily, I simply wanted to make my mom happy. Because at age 15, I got locked up a particular time. And when she picked me up from the juvenile detention center, she had this look in her eyes. It was like a look of giving up on me, although she didn't want to. It was like, you know, I'm trying hard. I give you everything. I do what I can. You have 3 other siblings I have to be attentive to. I can't continue to be here for you. And at that moment, I changed, and I placed sort of that want to just please my mom, and I put it in the center of my heart, and I let that drive me. And that's much of why I am where I am today. So, this Puerto Rock Hiba slang. Levántate, Boricua. Wake up to the sweet chants de los gallos croqueando. Smell the sweet scents of naranjas, mango, guayabas, quenepas, tamarindo, guanábana. And don't forget the island go coco con los locos lounging en la esquina, vente con los machetes, waiting to enlighten you. Con un sabor de leche fresca y malta, una mezcla de caña, azúcar y molaza. Y dale pa'lante, mano, con un juego de béisbol, con madera y bolón. Y los nenes jugando canicas, patea la lata, cantando la música del encanto. La isla de Borinquen, donde he nacido yo. Orgullo por la isla del encanto, con playas y palmas y tropical plantas, un paraíso de montañas protected by nuestros padres y madres, taíno, español, and africano. An historia misspelled, expel, don't tell, but let's dispel. And next time that mommy says, mira, Juni, ve por allá, tú sabes, ahí abajo, y búscame la cosa, tú sabes, la cosa, encima del dedo, por allá. You know exactly what she's talking about. Watching los jíbaros bailando la salsa y el merengue y con la bachata, o a los chicos y la chica con el reggaetón se encuentran en la charla talking about yanche, papo, yanche, pero eso sí que está gufiado, eso me gusta, brother, pero me gusta con cojones. Los caballeros, compañeros, with mouthfuls de llame y yautía, las damas hablando sobre novelas con plátanos de batata y yuca con calabaza. Masticando chicharrón con arroz y gandules, habichuelas tiernas y plátanos maduros, terminando con flan, un cafecito con leche o cola champán. And then, bueno, ya tú sabes, alabar a Dios. Y no te olvides de sábado gigante, porque siempre en domingo ya se acabó. Al fin del día con la familia te retira y acuéstate y duerme, borica, duerme y dale para abajo, chileando con los sapitos abrazados y los coquís cantando. Thank you. And then I want to close this out by saying this. There's this quote. This cat came up with it. His name is it's Mike Benitez, and it goes, you know, transformation is not in the complexity of how we relate, but in the simplicity of our authentic selves. When we're true to each other and to ourselves, when we follow our hearts, when we listen to others, we think about us and community collectively, we could get so much further together than we can individually anytime. Don't let the cultural practices of imperialism dictate your lives. In the words of Immortal Technique, right? I freestyle my destiny. It's not written in pages. Thank you.
You guys have any questions?
Can you please come down from Tacoma, Washington and stay here?
Right on, right on. It is Cali. It is Cali. No, thank you, bro. Lots of love, always humbled, but also know that you're one of my greatest teachers, too.
Any other questions, comments? I want to thank all of you for coming. I know some of you have to make it to your next class. If there is a question in the back.
I do. I'm a speak out, but just, it's going to sound weird. Don't mind me. I still struggle with my humility a little bit. Google me. And I don't have a particular website, but there's a bunch of stuff on the line about me and what I do and all that stuff.
Thanks again for all of you for coming out.
Thank you all.